The first sound I heard that morning wasn't birds, or the hum of sprinklers, or even my coffee machine clicking on. It was the metallic clank-clank of chains being dragged across hot asphalt. When I looked outside, I saw a tow truck angled crooked in front of my driveway, hydraulic arms already sliding beneath the tires of my F-150. And standing there, arms crossed like she was queen of the cul-de-sac, was Karen, our HOA president. She smirked when she caught me staring, and in her shrill voice shouted up at my window, "Rules are rules. This truck is gone today." The tow driver hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but Karen snapped her fingers like she owned him. Neighbors peeked through blinds, some even stepping onto porches, whispering like it was free entertainment. My chest tightened. That truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was my livelihood, my freedom, my weekends with my son. I threw on my boots, stormed outside, and shouted, "You touch my truck, and you'll regret it." But here's what Karen didn't know. I had a plan brewing that would turn her little towing stunt into the biggest humiliation this neighborhood had ever seen. Fade to black. Text on screen. Here's how Karen's power trip turned into her downfall. I've lived in this neighborhood for just over 5 years. It's one of those picture-perfect suburban developments. Manicured lawns, cookie-cutter houses painted in approved shades of beige, and a homeowners association that seems to believe they're running the Pentagon instead of a cul-de-sac. For the most part, I kept my head down. I paid my dues on time, $125 every month, and kept my property neat. I'm not the type to pick fights over mailbox paint colors or grass length. But I drive a truck. Not just any truck. My 2014 Ford F-150, a steel gray beast with mud on the tires and a toolbox bolted into the bed. It's not for show. I run a small contracting business, and that truck hauls everything. Lumber, tools, generators. Without it, my business doesn't move. And beyond that, it's mine and my son Dylan's weekend escape. We fish, we camp, we load up bikes in the back and just go. The HOA, however, didn't see it that way. See, buried in the 83-page HOA bylaws is a clause, Section 14, subsection C, that states, no commercial vehicles may be parked in driveways or on the street overnight. The problem? My truck had my company's magnetic decals on the side doors. In their eyes, that made it commercial. Enter Karen. She became HOA president about 2 years ago. Imagine a middle school hall monitor, but with a legal pad and a god complex. She patrolled the neighborhood in yoga pants and a golf cart, scribbling down violations. Too many lawn ornaments? Fine. Trash can left out past 9 a.m.? Fine. Christmas lights up in January? Fine. The first time she targeted me was last spring. I got a letter taped to my door in bright red ink. Notice a violation. Commercial vehicle parking. Fine. $75. Immediate action required. I thought it had to be a mistake. I peeled off the decals, sent an email with photo proof, and figured that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Because Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was looking for a fight. Over the next few months, she started stacking violations like they were playing cards. $50 for oil spots on the driveway. $100 for improper lawn height. Even $25 for leaving a ladder visible from the street. It was harassment, plain and simple. My neighbors sympathized, but nobody dared to cross Karen. She thrived on intimidation. Then came the night of the HOA board meeting, August 12th, 7:30 p.m. in the clubhouse. Karen stood at the front, reading off violations like she was reciting scripture. When she got to my name, she paused dramatically, looked me dead in the eye, and announced, "Mr. Johnson's repeated disregard for community guidelines has left the board no choice but to escalate enforcement." That's when she dropped her first real bomb. Effective immediately, she was moving to authorize the towing of my truck if it was ever parked in my driveway overnight again. And judging by that tow truck outside my house weeks later, she wasn't bluffing. But what Karen didn't know was this. I wasn't just some pushover contractor with a truck. I had been quietly preparing for this moment, and the fireworks were only beginning. I've lived in this neighborhood for just over 5 years. It's one of those picture-perfect suburban developments, manicured lawns, cookie-cutter houses painted in approved shades of beige, and a homeowners association that seems to believe they're running the Pentagon instead of a cul-de-sac. For the most part, I kept my head down. I paid my dues on time, $125 every month, and kept my property neat. I'm not the type to pick fights over mailbox paint colors or grass length. But I drive a truck. Not just any truck. My 2014 Ford F-150, a steel gray beast with mud on the tires and a toolbox bolted into the bed. It's not for show. I run a small contracting business, and that truck hauls everything. Lumber, tools, generators. Without it, my business doesn't move. And beyond that, it's mine and my son Dylan's weekend escape. We fish, we camp, we load up bikes in the back and just go. The HOA, however, didn't see it that way. See, buried in the 83-page HOA bylaws is a clause, Section 14, subsection C, that states, no commercial vehicles may be parked in driveways or on the street overnight. The problem? My truck had my company's magnetic decals on the side doors. In their eyes, that made it commercial. Enter Karen. She became HOA president about 2 years ago. Imagine a middle school hall monitor, but with a legal pad and a god complex. She patrolled the neighborhood in yoga pants and a golf cart, scribbling down violations. Too many lawn ornaments? Fine. Trash can left out past 9 a.m.? Fine. Christmas lights up in January? Fine. The first time she targeted me was last spring. I got a letter taped to my door in bright red ink. Notice of violation. Commercial vehicle parking. Fine, $75. Immediate action required. I thought it had to be a mistake. I peeled off the decals, sent an email with photo proof, and figured that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Because Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was looking for a fight. Over the next few months, she started stacking violations like they were playing cards. $50 for oil spots on the driveway, $100 for improper lawn height, even $25 for leaving a ladder visible from the street. It was harassment, plain and simple. My neighbors sympathized, but nobody dared to cross Karen. She thrived on intimidation. Then came the night of the HOA board meeting. August 12th, 7:30 p.m. in the clubhouse. Karen stood at the front, reading off violations like she was reciting scripture. When she got to my name, she paused dramatically, looked me dead in the eye, and announced, Mr. Johnson's repeated disregard for community guidelines has left the board no choice but to escalate enforcement. That's when she dropped her first real bomb. Effective immediately, she was moving to authorize the towing of my truck if it was ever parked in my driveway overnight again. And judging by that tow truck outside my house weeks later, she wasn't bluffing. But what Karen didn't know was this. I wasn't just some pushover contractor with a truck. I had been quietly preparing for this moment, and the fireworks were only beginning. After that HOA meeting in August, I knew things were about to get ugly. And sure enough, Karen wasted no time proving me right. The very next morning, I found a bright yellow slip stuck under my windshield wiper. Final warning, your vehicle is in violation. Next occurrence will result in towing. It wasn't just the words, it was the smug handwriting. Karen had actually signed it herself, like she thought she was some sheriff handing out tickets in the Wild West. I peeled it off, crumpled it, and tossed it in the bed of my truck. But my stomach twisted because I knew she wasn't bluffing. For the next 2 weeks, it was a game of cat and mouse. I started parking my truck at my buddy's house down the road some nights. Other times I parked in the garage, shoving Dylan's bikes and half my tool inventory to the side just to squeeze it in. But every time I pulled into the driveway, I caught Karen watching me from across the street, arms crossed, lips pursed, like she was just waiting for me to slip up. And slip up, I eventually did. It was the first Friday of September. I'd had a brutal week, 2 job sites running late, a rainstorm that ruined a roofing project, and Dylan coming down with a fever. By the time I got home, I was exhausted. I parked the truck in the driveway, grabbed my kid from the back seat, and carried him inside. In all the chaos, I forgot one simple thing, moving the truck into the garage. At 6:45 the next morning, I woke to the sound of a diesel engine outside. I ripped open the blinds, and there it was, a tow truck already backing up to my Ford. And Karen, she was standing right beside it in a pink tracksuit, clutching her HOA binder like it was a holy book. I ran outside in my slippers, shouting, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen didn't even flinch. "Per Section 14, subsection C," she said smugly, "you violated the bylaws again. This vehicle is being removed immediately. The tow driver, poor guy, looked caught between us, like a kid stuck between divorcing parents. "Sir," he said, almost apologetically, "I got the work order signed by the HOA president. I don't have a choice." I was furious. "You can't just tow a man's truck out of his own driveway. This is private property." Karen cut me off with that nails-on-chalkboard voice. "Actually, our property. You agreed to the rules when you bought in. Maybe next time you'll read the fine print." Neighbors had started gathering on the sidewalks, whispering and filming with their phones. The humiliation burned hotter than the September sun beating down on my neck. I knew I had to stop this. I called the cops. When the officer showed up, I thought, finally, someone reasonable. But Karen practically skipped over to him like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. She shoved the bylaws into his hands and said, "See? Right here. Commercial vehicle. Tow authorized." The officer skimmed it, then sighed. "Sir, technically she's right. If the HOA rules state this, then the tow isn't illegal." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I begged, "Officer, come on, this is harassment. This is my personal vehicle, my livelihood. Without it, I can't work." He lowered his voice. "Look, I get it. But unless you fight it legally, my hands are tied." Karen smirked, and I swear she winked at me as the tow truck started raising the front end of my Ford off the ground. That's when I snapped. I shouted so loud half the street heard it. "You lay one more finger on that truck, and you'll regret it for the rest of your life." The driver froze. The officer put a hand on my shoulder. "Karen," she just laughed. And that's when I realized I couldn't play defense anymore. Letters, fines, pleading, it wasn't working. She wasn't going to stop until she broke me. So I made a decision right then, standing in my slippers on that hot pavement, watching my truck dangle on the tow chains. Enough was enough. It was time to go on the attack. And that's when I started planning the kind of revenge Karen would never see coming. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the HOA bylaws Karen loved to quote like scripture. 83 pages of dense, soul-sucking legal jargon. But buried in the fine print, I noticed something interesting. The towing clause required 2 board member signatures, not just the president's. Karen had signed the work order alone. Strike one. I dug deeper. I started reading state statutes about private property and vehicle towing. According to our state law, any HOA that authorizes towing had to give the owner a written notice at least 48 hours in advance. Karen never gave me one. She just skipped straight to chains and tow trucks. Strike 2. Then came strike 3, the fatal blow. My neighbor Mark, who sat quietly on the HOA board, slipped me a tip. Over beers in my garage, she said, "Look, man, Karen's been pushing this towing thing without board approval. She didn't even bring it up for a vote." That was all I needed. Not only had she broken the HOA's own rules, she'd violated state law. So I went into full preparation mode. I documented everything. Every violation notice, every email, every time Karen harassed me in front of witnesses. I printed photos of my truck parked neatly in my driveway, no oil leaks, no mess, nothing commercial, except the decals I'd already removed. I even set up a little trap of my own. One night, around 11:30, I left my truck in the driveway with a camera rolling from my upstairs window. Sure enough, around midnight, Karen crept up in her golf cart and started snapping pictures with her phone. What she didn't realize was that she was trespassing on my property at the time. Strike 4. By the end of the week, I had a binder thicker than a college textbook. Evidence, witness statements, video footage, HOA bylaws highlighted in neon yellow, and tucked neatly in the back pocket, the name and number of a lawyer friend who loved nothing more than tearing corrupt HOAs apart. But here's the best part. I didn't even have to sue, at least not yet. I could hit Karen where it hurt most, her reputation. The HOA had its next monthly meeting scheduled for September 10th, 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. Attendance was mandatory for board members, and half the neighborhood usually showed up because Karen ran those meetings like a circus. I decided that would be the stage. I would walk in with my binder of evidence, wait until Karen tried to flex her power again, and then drop the hammer in front of everyone. The week leading up to the meeting felt like a movie montage. Me, hunched over the kitchen table at 2 a.m. highlighting bylaws, printing copies at the FedEx office with one eye over my shoulder, paranoid Karen might somehow catch me. rehearsing my speech in the shower, in the truck, even lying in bed staring at the ceiling. Dylan noticed my intensity. One night he asked, "Dad, are you going to be okay?" I smiled and said, "Don't worry, buddy. Dad's about to teach someone a very important lesson." By the time the 10th rolled around, I was ready. My binder was packed. My lawyer friend was on standby. And Mark, the board member who tipped me off, agreed to back me up publicly if things got heated. When I walked into that clubhouse, Karen was already at the front, smug as ever, binder in hand. She looked at me, smirked, and whispered loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Hope you said goodbye to your truck." I just smiled, sat down, and waited for my moment. And when that moment came, Karen never saw the trap closing around her. The clubhouse was packed that night. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor, neighbors whispered in low tones, and the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights set an almost courtroom-like tension. Karen strutted to the podium like she was about to deliver the State of the Union. Pink blazer, clipboard in hand, smug little smile. She opened the meeting with her usual roll call and boring announcements. But everyone knew why they were there. After a few items of old business, she slammed her binder shut and said loudly, "Now, let's discuss Mr. Johnson's repeated violations. As you all know, the board has authorized towing of his commercial vehicle. The community deserves better than someone who thinks he's above the rules." A few neighbors murmured, uneasy. Some looked at me, clearly sympathetic but too afraid to speak. That was my cue. I stood up slowly, binder in hand, and walked to the front. My boots echoed on the tile floor. Karen crossed her arms. "You're not on the agenda," she snapped. "Funny," I said, locking eyes with her. Neither was towing my truck illegally. But here we are. The room went dead silent. I placed my binder on the podium, next to her clipboard, and flipped it open. Page 47, Section 14, Subsection C. HOA bylaws require 2 board signatures for a vehicle tow authorization. Care to show the second signature on the order you gave? Karen froze. She shuffled papers, stammering. It was an emergency action. As president, I have authority. Wrong. I cut her off. State Statute 46.2, subsection D requires written notice 48 hours in advance before towing a vehicle from private property. You gave me none. And here, I held up my phone and hit play. The video from my upstairs window filled the projector screen. Karen creeping onto my driveway at midnight, snapping pictures, trespassing like a wannabe detective. Gasps erupted around the room. Someone whispered, "Is that legal?" Another neighbor muttered, "She's gone too far." Karen's face flushed beet red. She tried to snatch my phone, but I pulled it back. "You violated HOA bylaws, state law, and my private property rights. And you did it all without board approval." Board member Mark stood up from the front row. "He's right. We never voted on any towing policy." Karen acted alone. It was like the air had shifted. Suddenly the neighbors weren't just spectators. They were jurors, watching Karen squirm under cross-examination. Karen raised her voice, shrill and panicked. "This man is a menace. He thinks the rules don't apply to him. If we don't make an example of him, we'll have chaos in this neighborhood." I leaned in close, my voice calm, almost a whisper, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "The only chaos here is the one you created." I pulled out the final piece of my trap, a letter from my lawyer, stamped and signed. I handed it to the nearest board member. "This is a formal notice of intent to sue. If my truck is touched again, Karen will be personally liable for damages, harassment, and trespassing. Not the HOA, Karen." The room erupted. Neighbors started clapping. Some even laughed. Phones were out, recording everything. Karen's eyes darted around, realizing her iron grip on the neighborhood was slipping. And then came the knockout punch. The police officer who'd been called during the earlier tow attempt. I had spoken to him in advance. He stepped into the room right on cue, in full uniform. He looked at Karen and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Ma'am, if you authorize another tow without following proper procedure, you could be facing criminal charges." Dead silence. Karen's jaw dropped. Her eyes widened. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small, cornered, powerless. I turned to the neighbors, raised my binder, and said, "I don't mind following rules, but rules work both ways. Nobody, president or not, is above the law. The room erupted into cheers. People clapped, whistled, even stomped their feet. Karen tried to shout over the noise, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of her own empire crumbling. And that's when I knew I'd won. But the fallout from that night was even worse for Karen than I imagined. In the days after that HOA meeting, the neighborhood felt different. For the first time in years, people weren't walking on eggshells around Karen. They stopped me in the street to shake my hand. Some even dropped off beers or baked goods at my doorstep. The board held an emergency vote that following week. Karen was officially stripped of her authority to act alone and placed under investigation for misconduct. 2 months later, she was forced to resign as HOA president altogether. Word spread that she'd even been fined personally for trespassing on my property. As for my truck, it never left my driveway again, not on a tow chain, not under threat, not at all. In fact, the board quietly amended the bylaws to clarify that work trucks without permanent markings were allowed. It was as close to an apology as I'd ever get. The best part wasn't the rule change, though. It was the way the neighborhood shifted. Folks who'd been silent finally spoke up. The quiet nods I got at the mailbox, the laughter when someone joked about Karen's golf cart patrol. The relief in knowing the tyranny was over, that was worth more than any legal win. Karen, she tried to keep strutting around, but her power was gone. Neighbors avoided her. She eventually put her house up for sale. Last I heard, she was terrorizing another subdivision 2 towns over. And me, I still park my Ford proudly in the driveway every night. Dylan loves to remind me, "Dad, remember when Karen almost stole our truck?" I smile and tell him the same thing every time. "Son, bullies only win if you let them. But between you and me, something tells me Karen's story in my life isn't quite over." Because just when I thought the battle was done, Karen found a new way to strike back.